A single engine once made NASCAR so nervous they banned it before it ever won a race. Another was so dominant, it forced the sport to invent an entirely new rulebook. And one nearly bankrupted every team except the one that built it. Welcome to the story of how engineers turned stock car racing into an arms race, and how NASCAR spent decades playing catch-up with their own rulebook. Because when you tell brilliant minds they can't do something in motorsport, they don't stop. They just get creative. Let's start with the engine that broke NASCAR, before most people even knew what NASCAR was. The year is 1963. NASCAR's still young, scrappy, and pretending these are actual stock cars you could buy at a dealership. Cute idea. Then Chrysler shows up with the 426 Hemi, and suddenly that illusion explodes like a blown head gasket at Talladega. The Hemi wasn't just powerful, it was obscene. We're talking about an engine that produced 425 horsepower in street trim. That's the number they admitted to anyway. The real figure? Probably closer to 500. And this is 1963. Remember, most family sedans were putting out maybe 150 horsepower on a good day. The engine got its name from its hemispherical combustion chambers. Sounds technical, and boring until you realize what that actually means. Better airflow, more efficient combustion, and most importantly, the ability to fit massive valves that could gulp fuel and air like a fraternity brother at an open bar. Richard Petty put one in his Plymouth and absolutely demolished the 1964 Daytona 500. We're not talking about a close finish. He lapped the field. Twice. It was embarrassing for everyone except Petty, who probably couldn't stop grinning. NASCAR's response? They banned it. Just straight up said nope, you can't use that anymore. Their official reasoning was that the Hemi wasn't available in enough production cars to qualify as stock, which was technically true. Chrysler was only installing them in high-performance models, not your grandma's sedan. But here's where it gets interesting. Chrysler didn't cry about it. They didn't lawyer up or threaten to leave the sport. Instead, they said fine, we'll boycott your entire 1965 season. And they did. Petty and the other Chrysler drivers went drag racing instead. NASCAR races that year had all the excitement of a retirement home bingo night. By 1966, NASCAR blinked first, but with restrictions, smaller carburetors, weight penalties, the usual bag of tricks sanctioning bodies use when they've backed themselves into a corner. The Hemi was back, but neutered just enough to keep Ford and Chevy teams from rage quitting. Fast forward to 1969. Ford's been getting stomped by those Hemis for years now, and they're tired of it. So they do what any rational corporation would do when losing. They build something completely unhinged. Enter the Boss 429. Ford claimed they needed this engine for their new Mustang. Sure guys, a 375 horsepower NASCAR engine just happens to fit perfectly in a pony car. What a coincidence. The Boss 429 was Ford's middle finger to Chrysler, wrapped in 7 liters of displacement. It had the same hemispherical head design Chrysler was using. Because if you can't beat them, copy them. And make it bigger. The thing was so massive they had to modify the Mustang's shock towers, just to squeeze it in. NASCAR approved it because Ford technically met the production requirements. They built the minimum number of streetcars, sold them to the public, and called it legal. Never mind that those streetcars cost a fortune, and were about as practical as a screen door on a submarine. The rulebook said 500 production units. Ford built 859. Checkmate. For one glorious season, Ford had the upper hand. The Boss 429 Talladecas and Cyclones dominated the superspeedways. Then NASCAR did what NASCAR does best. They changed the rules again. Engine size limits, carburetor restrictions, more weight penalties. But the real chaos was just getting started. Because while Ford and Chrysler were measuring displacement in the garage, they were measuring something very different in the wind tunnel. Aerodynamics. See, by the late 1960s, teams figured out that horsepower only matters if you can actually get it to the ground without the car trying to become an airplane. The Dodge Charger Daytona and Plymouth Superbird weren't just cars. They were experiments in making sheet metal cheat physics. That giant wing on the back? That nose cone that looked like it came off a fighter jet? Those weren't for show. The Charger Daytona hit 200 miles per hour at Talladega in 1970. 200 in 1970. with technology that would make a modern engineering student laugh. Buddy Baker's record-setting run changed everything, because NASCAR realized they weren't just dealing with engine problems anymore. The cars themselves had become the problem. These stock cars now looked like something from a sci-fi movie, and they were getting dangerously fast. NASCAR's solution was typically blunt. In 1971, they cut engine displacement from 7 liters to 6.9 liters. Not a huge change, but enough to make teams throw away months of development work. They also banned those wild aero packages. The Superbird and Daytona were done. If you wanted to race, you needed a car that actually looked like something in a showroom. This kicked off what's known as the template era. NASCAR created actual physical templates, basically giant stencils, that cars had to fit under. No more creative interpretations of body panels. No more. Well, technically it's stock if you squint. If the template didn't fit, you didn't race. But engineers are stubborn people. Tell them they can't modify the body. They'll just go back to the engine. Which brings us to the small block wars of the 1970s and 80s. The small block Chevy 350 became the weapon of choice for teams that couldn't afford the big block programs. Lighter, more reliable, and easier to work with. The catch: less displacement means less power. Basic physics. Except physics is really more of a suggestion when you're a NASCAR crew chief with a chip on your shoulder. Teams started boring out cylinders, stroking crankshafts, and doing every trick in the book to squeeze more displacement from these small blocks. NASCAR inspectors showed up with measuring tools. Teams showed up with better hiding spots. It became a game of cat and mouse. NASCAR would catch a team running an oversized engine. That team would get fined. They'd pay the fine, consider it a cost of doing business, and find a new way to cheat the next week. Because the prize money for winning was more than the fine for cheating. Do the math? By 1988, NASCAR had enough. They introduced the restrictor plate at Daytona and Talladega. This little piece of metal sits between the carburetor and the intake manifold, literally restricting how much air the engine can breathe. Less air means less power. Problem solved. Except restrictor plates created their own problems. They bunched up the field, making the racing closer but also more dangerous. Instead of cars getting strung out based on speed, everyone ran in giant packs. One wrong move and you'd collect half the field in a crash. The 1987 Bobby Allison incident, where his car went airborne and nearly went into the grandstands, had NASCAR terrified of another disaster. The restrictor plate was NASCAR's admission that the engines had gotten too good. They'd spent decades letting teams push the boundaries, and now they needed to literally choke the power back. It was like putting a muzzle on a pit bull. Effective, but kind of sad when you think about what these engines were capable of. Then came the 1990s, and with them, the era of the wind tunnel. Teams spent millions on aerodynamic testing. Ford rolled out the Thunderbird. Chevy had the Lumina. Dodge eventually came back with the Intrepid. Each manufacturer claimed their car was more aerodynamic, more stable, more everything. The problem? These advantages came from the chassis and body, not the engine. But the engines were still evolving too. Teams found ways to massage the intake ports, tweak valve timing, and extract every possible horsepower from the rulebook. NASCAR responded by getting more specific with their rules. Valve sizes were mandated. Compression ratios were limited. They even specified the exact type of gasket you could use. It was micromanagement on a molecular level. In 2007, NASCAR pulled the nuclear option. They introduced the car of tomorrow, later renamed to Gen 5. This wasn't just a new template. This was NASCAR saying we're done pretending these are stock cars. Every car used the same chassis, same dimensions, same aerodynamics. The only difference was the decal on the front showing which manufacturer it was supposed to be. The engines, still restricted on the big tracks, still heavily regulated everywhere else. Teams could tune them, but only within a very narrow window. The days of finding a loophole and dominating for a season were over. Or so NASCAR thought. Because in 2012, Penske Racing showed up with something interesting. They'd figured out that while NASCAR regulated engine internals very carefully, they were less specific about certain external components. Penske found a way to manipulate the fuel pressure in a way that technically didn't violate the rules, but gave them a measurable advantage. They won races. Lots of them. And when NASCAR finally figured out what they were doing, the rulebook got even longer. More specifications, more measurements, more restrictions. This pattern repeated itself throughout the 2010s. NASCAR would close the loophole. The sport became less about building a better engine and more about better understanding the rules than your competitors. Then in 2022, NASCAR introduced the next-gen car, or Gen 7. This is where we are today. Single-source supplied parts, standardized components. The engine is still a naturally aspirated V8, but its development potential is severely limited. Teams can tune them, sure, but they're working with fractions of percentages, not the massive leaps of the past. The next-gen car represents NASCAR's final surrender in the engine wars. They essentially said, look, we can't keep playing this game. Every time we close one loophole, teams find two more. So instead, we're just going to remove the variables entirely. Some fans hate it. They miss the days when a clever engineer could find an edge and exploit it for a season. When teams had different engines making different power, and strategy actually included managing your equipment. Other fans love it. Closer racing, more parity. Drivers matter more than engineering budgets. Everyone's on a more level playing field. But here's what's undeniable. Every one of those engine wars pushed technology forward. The Hemi influenced production car design for decades. The Boss 429 became a legend. The small block Chevy developments trickled down to street cars. Even the restrictor plate era taught engineers about efficiency and making power with less displacement. NASCAR spent 60 years trying to control engine development, and every attempt created unintended consequences. Ban the Hemi, and Ford builds something bigger, and teams just find more efficiency. Add restrictor plates and the racing becomes more dangerous in different ways. Standardize everything, and you lose the innovation that made the sport interesting. The truth is, NASCAR never really wanted to stop engine development. They just wanted to stop whoever was winning at the time. The Hemi was fine until it won too much. The aero cars were cool until they got too fast. Every rule change was reactive, not proactive. And the engineers? They loved it. Give a gearhead a rule book, and they'll find the loopholes before the ink dries. Tell them they can't do something, and they'll find 3 ways to do it anyway. The arms race between NASCAR and its teams was half the fun. Today's next-gen cars are safer, cheaper to run, and create better racing in some ways. But they're also the admission that NASCAR couldn't win the engine wars. The teams were too smart. The engineers too creative. The only solution was to take away the battlefield entirely. So the next time you watch a NASCAR race and wonder why all the engines sound the same, why the cars are so evenly matched, why there aren't massive mechanical advantages anymore, remember it's because for decades, teams and manufacturers proved they couldn't be trusted with freedom. They'd optimize every molecule, exploit every ambiguity, and spend whatever it took to win. And honestly, that's exactly what made it great.